Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. So on today's podcast, I am absolutely delighted. I cannot tell you how delighted I am to have Edmund King OBE, I'll have you know, and president of the AA on the podcast. So Edmund, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on. It's fantastic.
Liz, it's an absolute pleasure to be on and looking forward to it.
So we met, the first time we've met a couple of times now, haven't we? The first time we met was at the Heathrow checkpoint of the EV rally. And I think, was it Estelle who had, was it Estelle? I'm trying to think. So that there was like a table of AA stuff and it was great just to meet you. I was a little bit in awe to start off with and I was like, oh my God, should I talk to him?
Come on. I mean, that's what the EV rallies are about. They're about, meeting people from different sectors and also they're about showing that EVs can work up and down the country, they can go long distances. So, yeah, that's why the AA have been involved, to meet people like you and meet a cross range of people just to show off EVs in practice.
And they do an absolutely amazing job. Greenfleet just are fantastic, aren't they? And I was going to say actually later on, but you are involved in so many EV kind of exhibitions, events, all sorts of things, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I think also I have done every single Greenfleet EV rally. So
have you?
And I've driven most of the way myself, even when I've had co-drivers, because I'm one of those people who, if I'm in a car, quite seriously, if I'm in a car, I really do prefer to be driving. And it's not about nervousness of other drivers. I mean, it's really not. It's just I actually enjoy driving. I enjoy kind of being in control of the car. And so whether it was John O'Groats to Land's End, or the first one was the tour of Scotland, which was absolutely fascinating, and then the last one was doing the 5 capitals from Cardiff to Bristol to London to Edinburgh, across to Belfast to Dublin. Brilliant, just really, really good events. And it does show that EVs and indeed electric vans, and the last one we had an electric HGV as well, and an electric motorcycle, but it does show in practice EVs can work and it can be great fun. And certainly from my point of view, I found the EV rallies great fun, and I've learned a lot as well, about charging, about navigation, about planning ahead, and that is one thing that you do. But if you make that part of the journey, it can be a really enjoyable experience. You do not have to suffer from charger range or range anxiety.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because there's this misconception at the moment, and I've talked to a lot of people on this podcast about kind of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which has been exacerbated by the media, hasn't it? And it just puts people don't understand that there is a different way of dealing with an EV and EV charging to filling up a car with petrol or diesel or a van or whatever, but it's just about getting your head round that, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no doubt at all, because we survey AA members every month. We do surveys of about 10 to 12,000 members a month, and if we look back at attitudes to EVs a year ago or 2 years ago and then today, sadly some of that support for EVs has actually dropped off, and that can only be due to kind of some of the adverse stories that we see in the media. originally it was fairly comical stuff, like you can't drive them in the rain, and you can't go through a car wash, and all those sorts of things that were vaguely comical. But then more recently, I did news program last week, and the start of the interview was, well, EVs don't work in the cold, and they've dropped in value by 50%, and that was the introduction to the interview. And of course, absolute nonsense, and it was based on a clip from Chicago in minus 26 degrees, but we've had our friends like Chris Ramsey and his team going from the pole to pole in an EV. We have our colleagues in Norway, and we work very closely with the Norwegian Automobile Association. And in Norway, they have a massive penetration of EVs. Life doesn't stop when it goes to minus degrees in Norway. EVs do get around.
Yeah.
So there really is such nonsense. And yes, of course, your range when it is extremely cold may drop between 10 and 20%, depending on the vehicle, depending on the weather. But then there are other benefits, when every other car in the street is frozen up and you've got your EV and you've got an app, it is great to just set that timer to put on the heating 10 minutes before you get in the car, to clear the windscreen, to heat up the car. And so there are great advantages in the cold. They're not all disadvantages. But yeah, without a doubt, various newspapers, various media outlets have got an agenda here. And quite often I have heard, the reporters kind of saying, oh, but our editor wants us to take this line. And I'm going, but that line isn't true. So yeah, we're kind of happy to defend it, but we shouldn't have to do that. With every new technology, you have to learn about that technology, and there will be teething problems that you'll get along the way. But that's part of learning about progress, about technology. And I think with EVs, it's the same as any other sort of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to go back to what you said about remote defrosting, because obviously we've had a period of kind of -4, -5, -6, haven't we, in January when we're recording this. And I had a WhatsApp message from my neighbour. And I didn't know that she'd seen this. There's only 10 houses on our little close where we live, and so we've got a Hyundai Ioniq. I was using the Blue Link app, and I put it onto remote, kind of defrost. And she sent me a message afterwards saying, I'm so jealous of you being able to do that remotely. I was just like, how did you know? I think it was it was obvious, wasn't it? If you're able to sit in a car and drive off without having to get your scraper out, that was kind of, I do want to talk to them about it, but I know they've only just got a new petrol car, so that's not particularly, but actually recognising that these things are possible, and like you said, Chris Ramsey and Julie, oh my goodness, if they don't get a documentary, well, I'll be blowed, honestly, because we need to get the word out, and they need a documentary to follow up with their amazing journey. So yeah, fantastic. Let's talk about you. Right, you have been president. We've got to talk about you. You've been president for 16 years at the AA.
Correct, yes.
I mean, goodness me. So you're a visiting professor of transport. I can't remember where that was.
Newcastle University.
Yes, that was it. I didn't write that one down, did I? But you must have seen so many changes over the years. I mean, I said to you before we started recording, didn't I? I remember my dad having an AA badge, and I didn't think about it much at the time, but it was on the front of his car, and it was just ornate and lovely. We had a German neighbour 2 doors up from us. He used to collect AA badges and other weird things like telephones and trailers, but that's another story. But the AA is a national institution, isn't it?
Well, it is, and part of my childhood, kind of growing up in Norwich for a while, and I got into cars quite early on because quite lucky at one stage lived next door but one to Colin Chapman, who was the founder of Lotus Cars. So I kind of knew his son and his daughters, so he took me to my first Grand Prix, and I'd see Lotus Elands going past our house and all of that. And it did, from the age of about 5, gave me this interest in cars. And then my dad was one of those, AA members back then. And I remember, the Ford Zodiac, the Ford Zephyr with his AA badge on the front. But what I remember more, and this does fascinate me, is that my dad used to use the AA route planning service.
Yes.
But
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah. But back then, so my dad would contact the AA and say, we are driving from Cringleford, Norwich to Bordeaux in France. My dad was in the wine trade for a bit, and we would like a route. And the AA would send a type-written, printed out route. You leave Cringleford by the A11, you drive towards Thetford, at Newmarket, and this was a written route. And, I remember from a very young age kind of having the AA route in front of me and saying to my dad, no, you go straight on the A11 here. And so, it was really, really fascinating kind of engaging with the AA then. But what you were alluding to, then obviously Route Planner now is totally different. You just go onto the website, you put in the location, you get different routes, you can avoid motorways, you can avoid congestion, and obviously that's much easier. But the essence of what the AA is doing, is very similar. We are there to give confidence to drivers, now and for the future. And in our history, if you look back, it was the AA actually who opened the first petrol station.
Yes,
I
saw that.
Aldermaston, that
was amazing.
Yeah, I think it was 1917. It was the AA that put up the first road signs. You can see some signs behind me. There's one for the royal wedding. So we still do signs for events, but we put up the first road signs. So the AA has always been there, kind of at the centre of innovation, and that's why with things like electric vehicles, we know it is the way that the automotive industry is going to go, and therefore the AA wants to be there and wants to help and inform and give people confidence going forward that you can drive an EV and it can be a pleasurable experience, and you can get from A to B in an EV as easily as in other vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. Do I remember rightly, on the motorways, if there was a diversion, were there AA diversion signs?
Yeah, early on the AA was involved in much more of that kind of, if you like, the active traffic management. Now we tend to be in more the passive. So if it's an event like Glastonbury or Wimbledon, we will do the signs for that, or like the royal wedding and things. But in the past we were much more involved in the kind of active side if there was a traffic jam and diversions were put in because the road was closed. But there are still, if you look at the AA basically at the moment, from learning to drive, we've got AA driving school, we've got BSM, to kind of buying your first car, we've got AA Cars, our used car portal, to insuring your car, we've got AA Insurance. We've also got AA accredited garages for your service, maintenance and repair. Even if you have an accident, we've got accident management. It just takes one call to the AA. We'll sort everything out for you. We will go to your insurance company, we'll go to the other insurance company. And, that is something that my son actually used about a year ago when someone went into the back of him in his car, which was pretty awful. But having that one phone number to call and take out the hassle. So, there are lots of things that the AA does, driver training as well. Our Drive Tech division does a lot of that. So, we do try and cover all aspects of driving to kind of help drivers, to help consumers in their daily lives.
Absolutely. And do you know what, just going back to what you were saying about getting a route planner, I think I remember, because we used to drive, so I'm originally from Halifax in West Yorkshire, and we used to travel down to Cornwall. Our like summer holidays were holidays in Cornwall, and I'm sure my dad used the AA route planners because he would have been driving and my mum would have been, she was kind of doing the navigating. But I'm sure and he was such a planner. My dad was. And I know where I've got mine from now. He loved planning trips, and even when he was less able-bodied, when he got older, and I'd moved down south. He was kind of, and I'd just let him do this. He'd kind of go, well, so do you know when you do this, then you need to go that way, and then don't forget that if you're on this road here, then you need to do that and that and that. I was like, yes, Dad.
But it is interesting, Liz, if we think back, because in that period, no one had a sat nav, so you had to rely on things like route planner or indeed the good old AA atlas that many people have.
Always had that.
Yeah, indeed, there were pictures of the late Queen with an AA atlas in the back of her Bentley. So even the Queen used it. But if you think back, we did have to plan quite a lot for our journeys because, I remember in my old Mini that cost £45, ironically going from St Albans to Chipping Norton to take my brother somewhere. And I remember it's kind of a cross-country route. And I remember having to write down the road names because when you're driving along, the signs don't say Chipping Norton when you're in Hertfordshire, so, and you forget how navigation has changed, and it's now so easy to key in Chipping Norton in your sat nav, and it will give you a choice. Do you take the M40? Do you take the M1? Do you cut across? And it will give you those choices. But yes, in the older days, we had to use our brains a little bit more. And I think this is interesting coming around to electric vehicles, because in a certain way, you are going back a little bit to some of that pre-planning. So I'm going up to Liverpool next weekend to watch Norwich play Liverpool in the FA Cup. And that is a long journey, and I will need to charge. So, I will check out some of the chargers on the way before we go, and I'll also check out, well, after 2 hours, I'd quite like to have a break anyway. Yes. So where will I stop off? Where's got the best chargers? Where's got the most chargers? And then that becomes part of the journey. So I don't really find that a hassle. I actually find it a positive because it means you're planning to stop off, you're planning to have a break, you're making that part of your journey, if you like, rather than it just being a hassle and just turning off at a motorway service area because it happens to be there. So, yes, a slight mind shift in terms of some of this, but I think it would do people good to actually plan their journeys a little more.
Exactly. And like you say, going back to what we used to do, planning was so important, wasn't it? And like you say, I think, to be honest, we've got a bit lazy when it comes to planning. We're so used to using, we use Google Maps all the time, but actually, I always check the number of chargers out. So our Ionix only got a 38.5 kilowatt hour battery. So, at the moment it's kind of doing 160 to a full charge, possibly, a lot more, kind of 190, something like that in the summer. But I do need to plan. And I think actually, if you need to stop. So we went down to Devon over Christmas. And we did, I had kind of plans in place that we probably needed to charge around Sedgemoor Services, which is around Bridgewater, from Reading to Bridgewater. And then, we'd be fine, kind of making sure we got a top up down there enough, and then we'd probably have another top up somewhere else. And that's all it is. But we would have stopped anyway. We would have stopped for lunch.
Yeah. But you do also, though, get to know service areas, perhaps some that are better than others, because I go to the West Country quite a lot, to Bristol, places like that. And I always know at Lee Delamere services I can get a charge. Maybe because I've been there quite a lot. So you do get some of your favourites. If you're going up the M40, you've got an Instavolt at Banbury that's got loads of chargers and all of that. So you do get to know various places out there. But the other thing I would recommend, and I know some EV drivers do this, and we learnt this a bit on I think it was the second EV rally from Land's End to John O'Groats, that sometimes as well, with a bit of planning, if you go slightly off the route, like, you know, Exeter services, I will accept it. At the time we did it, didn't have that many chargers, and it was incredibly busy.
Yes.
But there were some great chargers within 2 miles of there, one at an IKEA, one in a pub, actually, that we went to a couple of times in the pub car park. So, you know, yeah, a little bit of planning, maybe at busy times, that when you know that the main routes will be incredibly busy at half-term holidays, etc., then, you know, a little bit of lateral thinking can take you to other areas. And as I say, if you make that part of your journey, you know, pick out a good place to eat, or pick out a good place for the kids to have a run around, you know, perhaps near a park or adventure playground, something like that. Make it part of the journey, and it can be great fun. And again, that's not that different going back 40, 50 odd years with my family going to France, and my dad would stop off at picnic spots, and we'd all get out of the Citroen DS or the Zodiac, and they'd put the tartan blanket on the ground, and the Tupperwares would come out with the sandwiches. But that was part of the trip. It was, you know, it was part of the fun of the journey. So, yeah, it doesn't need to be a handicap.
No, it doesn't. And actually, going back to that trip that we had down to Devon, so we were heading to Westwood Ho just over Christmas, and of course we decided to travel. GridServe had already put out a thing saying the 23rd will be one of the most busiest day, as will the 27th, and I was like, well, we know what days we're travelling, don't we? So we did get to, because I'd said to my husband, I said, look, if you go to a main trunk road services at this time of year, it's going to be absolutely packed out. And of course we got there and it was absolutely packed out, and people were queuing and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't horrendous, it was manageable. But I kind of said to him, I said, look, you know, there's another charger within a mile. It's no skin off our nose. We could just literally go there. And we did, and there was nobody there. And we were charged up within 20 minutes. You know, it was brilliant.
But there still is this problem out there with it, you know, without a doubt. You and I have driven EVs for quite a while, so we know the ins and outs, but you know, we must accept it. There is still this assumption out there that an EV won't work for me because once a year I go to the Lake District, and there still is that assumption, you know, because I can't get to the Lake District on one charge, an EV's not good for me. And I think we've got to help to kind of change that mindset, and it comes back to the thing, well, if you were driving all the way to the Lake District, you should stop off anyway. You know, AA advice every 2 hours or so you should stop off, have a walk around. If you are slightly tired, have 2 cups of coffee, you know. So there's good safety advice as to why you should stop off. And for most people, obviously, if you are lucky enough to be able to charge at home, and about 60% of households can charge at home, then, you know, I can guarantee more than 90% of your charging will be done at home, because you're not going to the Lake District every week. You know, that's maybe once or twice a year where you have to plan your charging. But, you know, charging at home is quicker than filling up with petrol, because it just means plugging in and switching in, and then you can go to bed. You know,
Exactly.
It really is that easy.
So I pick my son up from school, drop him home. I mean, he's 18, he can do this stuff anyway, but actually, so I just flip open the charge port, and he's got his backpack on, and he just chucks, you know, puts the plug in, and that's it. It's just easy. And then we kind of at home, while I'm at home, we work out how much charge we might need, and then just make sure it's either up to, you know, 80% or whatever percentage we need to kind of for the next days or the rest of the week. It's not. There's no way that it is so much easier than going to a petrol station. I used to hate going to a petrol station because it was always so stinky anyway. Do you know what I mean? I didn't like, and also it made me go to the shop and buy chocolate, and that was not a good thing either.
No, it's funny about fuel stations, because one of the things I did used to buy, particularly at a weekend, you know, I'd buy a newspaper on a Sunday and whatever, and it would normally coincide with when I went to the petrol station. And I don't know why I was somewhat embarrassed by it, but I did go to this particular petrol station that I used to go to all the time. And I was then in my EV. So I parked up and went up and just picked up the Sunday Times. And I kind of made a point of saying, oh yeah, I'm sorry I haven't been in here this often, but I've got an electric vehicle now. And it was almost as if I had to justify to the guy, that's why I hadn't been in. So yeah, it does change a bit. So I now walk to the paper shop on the weekend to pick up my newspaper. So
Good for you.
Good for me in that aspect as well.
Absolutely. And I was just going to talk about when you were saying about people stopping for health and safety, health and safety reasons, because, we should be stopping every couple of hours anyway. I don't know whether you saw it. Aid Thompson actually was interviewed on GB News, and Nigel Farage said he could manage to drive 5 hours without stopping for a wee. And I just thought, actually, if you listen to what he was saying, I mean, I was shouting at the telly, I have to say, some of the stuff that was said, that they were talking about, and the skeptic that they had next to him. I just thought, do you know what? You're talking rubbish, and people are taking this in. I've got friends who watch that, which creeps me out. Anyway, sorry, that's not the right phrase, but you know what I mean. It just, yeah, people. But
we've actually ran safety campaigns about driver fatigue, and almost 20% of road deaths on motorways or dual carriageways, it is estimated, might be due to a driver dropping off at the wheel. Now, yeah, it's really hard to come up with precise figures because obviously people don't admit to it, but there are telltale signs. If it's a single vehicle, quite often at night, but not always, and it's veered off the motorway or the A road, that is due to driver fatigue. So no one should be driving 5 hours. It might be a macho thing to say I can do it, but actually your body, physically, your brain, mentally, does require a break. So, we've seen the effects of that at the AA. We produced a video about driver fatigue and whatever, and I certainly advocate to anyone taking a break every 2 or 2.5 hours. Get a bit of fresh air if you are tired, have some coffee, caffeine. And they actually say if you're really, really tired, you can have a kind of cat nap, but only for about 10 minutes. Anything more, you get into a kind of deeper sleep, and then when you try and drive again, that affects you. So, yeah, there are good safety messages why you should take a break.
Absolutely, and actually, this is kind of advocating the way that EVs work, anyway, isn't it? We just need to win more people over. I'm not saying we all need to be evangelistic about this, but actually, it's about explaining to people the reasons why it's important. And I was saying in a meeting the other week, it's also about the bigger picture, isn't it? It's about, we're talking about what we're doing to our planet.
No, I do think. Yeah, no, I do think that is a really good point, and I often make that point because I think sometimes within the broader industry, we're looking at all the ins and outs of EVs, we're looking at the technology, we're looking at the range, but then, why the heck are we doing this stuff? We're not doing it for fun. We are doing it because there is a climate crisis out there. There is an air quality crisis in many of our towns and cities. And that's why we're doing this.
Yes.
And what brings that home to me is actually walking around central London nowadays, and it is so much quieter and cleaner than it was 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago coming home from work in central London, blowing my nose and almost being black bits, particulates, because of the poor air quality. Now with things like low emission zones, congestion charge zones, air quality is cleaned up a lot. So I think we should remember there is a purpose to all of this. And I'll be the first to admit, I have always loved cars, so I might have been described as a petrol head. And maybe 10 years ago, when the first EVs were out there, they were not very exciting. You know, they were for the early adopters. They didn't fill me with joy. But what I can honestly say, you know, I blog about EVs, so I'm lucky enough to drive a whole range of EVs. And what I can now say is some of the best cars out there are electric vehicles. You know, the best to drive, more comfortable, more responsive, more kind of comforting to drive, and obviously many of them have got great performance. So I think, you know, we have changed from the early adopters. There's a whole range of cars out there, hundreds to choose from now. So I think we should be much more positive about it. And, you know, for me personally, I will accept the one thing I did miss at first, but I've kind of got used to it. What was the noise of the engine? I did like, you know, when I had an Alfa Romeo, I liked the noise of the engine, you know, without a doubt. And, you know, yeah, that's taken a little bit to get used to. Some cars I drive, you can put on a synthetic noise, and some are better than others. But, you know, that's a small price to pay for actually having cleaner, greener motoring.
It's like it just brought me back to being a kid. So I was a bit of a tomboy in my time, and my brothers were a lot older than me. And I think I inherited one of my brother's farmyards, and I had loads of cars as well. And you know, the whole playing with the car and going brum brum brum. So I was a bit of a, and because they were kind of 15, 16 years older than me. So actually they were already driving by the time I was old enough to kind of go, oh, this is good. My brother had a yellow MGB GT. And I went for it. I mean, God, just driving off in that with him, I was just like, this is just great. I love this, you know. And actually, yeah, that kind of, I wouldn't say I am a petrol head in some ways, but I just like cars. I mean, and the irony, because I've not said this, and I don't think I've even talked about this on the podcast. I was in a car crash when I was 18, when I was living in Halifax, and I was really seriously hurt. I was in hospital for 5 weeks. But the one thing that I wanted to do, and everybody had encouraged me to do afterwards, was to get back behind the wheel. So I was learning, and I'd failed my test the first time. I always say best people pass second time, but that's just my thoughts. But you know, so actually that was the best thing. And what you were saying earlier on about wanting to drive, mine partly is because of the fact of what happened, because I was a passenger in the car. I wasn't a driver, you know, but I like to be in control of behind the car. But actually, it never stopped me from loving driving. You get what I mean?
No, absolutely. In fact, myself, when I was about 17, was in the back of a Morris Minor Traveller, coming from a disco in Enston to Chipping Norton with, you know, a young, inexperienced driver. My sister Alice was also in the car. He swerved to avoid something. The car rolled over. I was shot out the back of the car, hit the ground, and kind of, I remember to this day the thought I had, am I dead? And then the thought was, what about Alice and the others in the car? And I ran to the car, which was upside down, squashed together, and they all got out pretty much unscathed, you know. But you know, so driver safety is a big thing, and one of the beauties of modern cars is that they are actually much safer thanks to Euro NCAP crash testing. The cars themselves are safer, but obviously, you know, the driver has to take responsibility. But linking that back to kind of young drivers, one of the radical changes that we will see in the next 10 years, and we're beginning to, is that young drivers won't learn to drive in manual cars because electric vehicles are all automatic. And we're already seeing this at the AA driving school. You know, we brought electric vehicles onto the fleet a couple of years ago, and the demand now is actually increasing for people to take an automatic test. Whereas in our day, it was always kind of looked down upon. You know, you're not a proper driver if you can't change gears, you can't driver's stick shift. You know, you've got to use the gears at corners and all of that. So obviously that is changing, and you know, ultimately it will make it easier to pass the driving test, because clutch control and hill starts and stuff. Yes. You know, it's some of the top reasons why people actually fail their tests. So again, this is going to change things for the future. And one of the things I often say is really, in terms of automotive, look back 100 odd years, and cars have remained pretty much the same. You know, 4 wheels, a steering wheel, gears, and all of that. I think the next 10 years, with electric cars, with connected cars, with autonomous cars, we'll probably see more change in the next 10 years than we have in the last 100 years. And I think much of that change will be positive. You know, it can lead to road safety. One of you know, the passions that gets me up every morning and gets me to work is that still 5 people a day are killed on our roads. That is not good enough. You know, it is scandalous. There must be more that we can do in terms of road safety. And design of the car is one thing, road infrastructure is another, driver education is the other. So it's a combination of all of those things. But, you know, we shouldn't be complacent about it. We should be all working to bring those figures down to 0.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, does that, I was going to say, so that's kind of refers back to the driving lessons and the youngsters as well, doesn't it? Because, I mean, there's been a few teenagers kind of dying in accidents recently, which has been quite heartbreaking. You know, I can't imagine how it would be, you know, for the parents. I was going to ask you, actually, relating to driving lessons and kind of, it's not up to a driving instructor to actually teach a student, you know, a pupil, to how to be, well, it is up to them to teach them how to be safe, but actually the follow on, because I say to my son, you know, you learn to drive, but you learn to drive having the lessons, but then you only really learn once you've passed and you're out on your own. And youngsters, and I do remember myself, you know, kind of taking a few risks when I was younger, but I tried to make sure they were a bit more measured. Do you think driving lessons in EVs would reduce that, or add them, you know, as in the more people that move to EVs?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we say to our driving instructors, that with the change to EVs, when you're not learning to drive, you know, and change gears and all of that, that there are other things in terms of the driver's experience that they should all go through when you're learning. So, for example, you shouldn't just learn in an urban area. You should get out onto rural roads. You should get out onto dual carriageways. And now that the law has changed, you know, with a qualified instructor in a dual control car, you can also go out and practice on a motorway. And indeed, my son, Finbar, was the first learner to go out on a motorway.
Was he?
With the media following, and Piers Morgan saying, "Oh, I don't like the look of that driver. He's bound to crash." Well, Piers, he didn't crash. He did well. So, no, but that's a step in the right direction, that we're looking to broaden out the experience. And one of the campaigns we ran a couple of years ago through the AA Trust was actually called Caitlin's Message. And Caitlin is a 19-year-old girl who was a passenger in a car with a couple of her girlfriends in the Northwest. And it was if you like, it was a very ordinary crash. It was a Friday night, going to a restaurant. There was no drink or drugs. The road was slightly wet, but it was an inexperienced driver. You know, they pulled out, there was a collision. Caitlin died as a result of that. And we've been working with Caitlin's mother, Sharon, to kind of highlight the causes. And one thing that came out of the campaign is what we call Caitlin's Message. And Caitlin's Message, if Caitlin was alive today, this is what she would say to her friends. And it does cover things like, you know, if you know the driver's inexperienced, it's probably better that a group of you don't go with that driver. They've got to learn more on their own. And it is so tragic that you know, and the reason we did this campaign was there was a run of 4 or 5 Monday mornings when I'm looking at press cuttings from the weekend, and you see 4 teenagers in Wales wrapped around a tree,
Yeah,
3
absolutely.
teenagers in Cumbria, and it was just too much. So part of this research, we also produced an interactive map, because we found out that 73% of fatalities of younger drivers were on rural roads. So, it's not on motorways, it's not on urban roads, it's on rural roads, and much of it is down to a lack of experience. So, this messaging is so important. Young people are much more likely to die as a result of a road collision, rather than drink or drugs or knives, albeit that those are problems in some areas, but overall it is a road collision. So there's much more work that we need to do to keep our young generation safe on the roads.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, just thinking about it, the crash that I was in, he'd only passed his test 3 weeks before, and it was it was really cold conditions, and he was on icy road. So yeah. I was also thinking about when I passed my test, and going back to what you said about motorways. I remember the first time I went on a motorway. I was, excuse my, I'm not being rude. I was bricking it, honestly. I really was, because actually I'd not had that experience like you're saying now that teenagers or whoever's learning to drive can have. And I took a friend with me because she was more experienced than I was. And I was like, right, I'm really nervous. Once I got on there, it was, do you know what it was? It was more getting onto the slip road and thinking, oh my God, have I got to play chicken with somebody? So actually, going back to what you said, what an amazing thing to actually be providing people now that ability to be able to have like you said about a dual control car going down the motorway, because that is, to me, and I know rural roads, people are going to actually try, and they'll probably do silly things that they wouldn't normally do, but motorways are kind of, they've got their own dangers, haven't they? For
Yeah,
young
indeed.
drivers.
I mean, like you, I remember explicitly being 17 in my mum's Hillman Avenger after I'd passed my test, and joining the M1 at Daventry, and on my own. And I remember, as a 17-year-old, I actually remember thinking how silly this is, that a 17-year-old like me, and I thought I was quite a good driver, but could go on a motorway with no direct tuition. Obviously I had driven on dual carriageways around Oxfordshire and stuff, but not on a motorway. So it's kind of ironic that some 40 odd years later the law is changed that does allow them. So the message to parents is, though, I would pay for an extra lesson for my offspring to go out on a motorway, because many kind of think, oh, well, it's not actually included in the test, and therefore we don't need to go on a motorway. It might not be included in the test, but as a life skill, it is well worth doing.
Absolutely. And I don't know what I might have said to you before. I think I was talking to Kirsty Pendleton about this, but my son, he had a bit of a bad experience with his driving instructor last year. So he's not wanted to take he probably just needs some top-up lessons, and she'd not taught him the basic skills. And actually somebody's told me since then that people think that she's Marmite. You either love her or you hate her, and you can tell which way I'm leaning. So actually I need to get him to a point now where he wants to go back into taking lessons, because it really it really knocked his confidence. And that's the other thing, isn't it? It's actually finding a driving instructor when you're learning to drive that works with you and actually is empathetic in the way that you need, and it's not driving lessons. Yes, they're prescriptive, but the way that they are taught is not one size fits all, is it?
No, indeed. And you should think about your driving instructor like you do your English or your maths teacher. They are just so important in giving you those basic life skills to go out there and use them. So if you're not happy with one instructor, you should try another, because generally all the instructors I've interacted with have been pretty good, but obviously they do vary. But Yeah, it is an important thing, and I feel quite sorry though for young drivers as well learning to drive at the moment, because there is still a backlog of driving tests as a result of COVID, and this is something, yeah, we've been campaigning with DVSA about, because many new drivers put in for a test as soon as they can, which you totally understand, because they might have to wait another 6 months, 12 months, whatever. And then they're almost blamed that when they take that test and don't pass it, that they weren't ready for the test. But you can kind of be sympathetic, because if they didn't put in for that test, it might be another year before they got a test. So, yeah, we hopefully that backlog is getting slightly better, but there's still more that needs to be done to free up more tests.
So I'll tell you something now. So that they're all, like I say, they're all 17 and 18 at James's school now, my son, and one of them took his test. He took his test in the Isle of Wight. We live in Reading. He took his test in the Isle of Wight, failed it. Went back to the Isle of Wight to take it again and passed. I mean, that's just kind of bonkers. His other friend took it in Winchester, failed it. And then he's just taken it in Southampton, and he's failed again, bless him. But actually, you know, so because of the fact that there are 2 examiners in Reading, and it's mad, honestly. The length of time that it takes to get a test, you've got to go somewhere else. When I first tried to look for a test for James, when we were thinking he was going to do it, I looked on the list of all the driving test centres, and I was thinking, oh, I wonder. I was looking for one that might actually have a lower population, or maybe an older population. So I originally put him down for Abergavenny. So yeah.
I mean, there are though all sorts of kind of urban myths about where it's easier to pass your test than others, and it was the same. It was the same when I was growing up. You know, Banbury was better than, you know, the next village or whatever. But ultimately, you know, we should be producing well-rounded drivers that can drive in urban areas, that can drive on rural areas, and now can drive on motorways. And the fact that learning in an automatic, if you like, frees up a couple of lessons, I would say to parents, it is well worth paying that extra money to give them that extra experience. And indeed, we always say also, you should get experience with your parents. You know, it's not just the driving lessons. It is those hours that you put in that gives you that broader experience for when you're going on your own in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sad thing was, he was actually driving to school and back, you know, so every day, and it's only 20 minutes, you know, and it was the same route, but I took him on rural roads, you know, and kind of all through Reading and stuff like that. But it wasn't the time that we were taking him out. It was the lack of instruction that he was getting. And please bear in mind, it wasn't an AA driving instructor. It was an independent driving instructor. I wouldn't have even brought this up if it was anything to do with that. But, you know, and I would never expect an AA driving instructor to be like that. It was, you know, it was just the fact that she'd not taught him some of the basics. So, and that's really important. But, you know, I am interested. Do you know how many numbers of EV driving instructors you have around the country?
Yeah, and again, there are challenges there, because it depends where the instructor lives. You know, have they got off-street parking? Can they charge at night? Have they got enough charge to have five lessons? So I think at the moment it's about 150, but it is increasing. Okay. But like all things, you know, the price of the vehicles have been slightly higher for the EV, and therefore for the franchises, the instructors are paying a bit more for the cars. So, you know, these things will stabilise, because as we've seen in the last 6 months or so, you know, the price of new EVs is gradually coming down. It is gradually equalising. So, yeah, at the moment, there's still a proportion of young drivers, and it's fine, who want to learn in a manual car. And, you know, some of them say, if we go on holiday to Spain, you might not be able to rent an automatic car, and that can be the case. So, you know, each their own. And, you know, others argue, and I'm not sure it's really true today, it probably was in cars of 20, 30 years ago, that it actually makes you a safer driver if you know about the gears. And I think that could have been the case 20, 30 years ago, where perhaps, you know, brakes weren't as good and you would change down gears before a corner, etc. But now with automatic cars, with the new technology, it kind of does that for you.
Yeah, and regen. If you've got regenerative braking in an EV, and actually, you know, that can help control the braking so much more anyway, can't it? Because it's a lot smoother, it's a lot nicer. I've got to say, I love one pedal driving. I was going to talk to you about me and my husband came up to Oldbury. So your office is in Oldbury. It's in the Midlands. Probably a couple of months ago, so about kind of November time. So my husband was speaking at the EV Cafe Partners Day. And actually, I was going to kind of compliment you on the building because I loved it. It was great, and there was kind of like the motorbike and the little cabin. You know, what do you call it? You know, the little cabin that you've got in the doorway that is kind of a proper AA, like it looked like a little call box. Is that what you used to have?
Well, yeah, those were, and now they're kind of listed buildings. I think there are about 150 left. So they were AA telephone boxes in effect. And what happened in the kind of 1950s and stuff, obviously no one had mobile phones or anything like that. So AA members would have a Yale key that fitted those AA boxes. So they could go to those AA boxes, unlock it, and use the phone that went through to the AA. And it's really interesting, even today, when some of our older members have died off, quite often their relatives will find this old AA Yale key and put it in an envelope and send it back to us, you know, saying, I thought you might need this key. You know?
Oh, I love that.
But yeah, so that is part of the history, you know, because how could you contact the AA when you didn't have mobile phones? So yeah, and some of our patrols today help with the upkeep of those telephone boxes because they are part of our kind of history, our heritage out there.
Yeah, I love it. I was gonna, do you know what? Because I said to you before, I did a little bit of research and looked on the website, on the AA website, and like I say, the AA was formed 19th of June 1905, which absolutely that just blew my mind. And I love the reason why it was formed, and I'm going to read this out because I wrote it down. In response to the zealous police enforcement of driving restrictions, the group organised teams of cyclists who, through a combination of signals and salutes, assisted drivers to stay safe on the roads and avoid punitive penalties. I love that. That would be me. That would have been me then. I'd be just like, no, let's do this. Fantastic.
But it was. Yeah, because in the early days of motoring, cars were restricted to 5 miles an hour, and at one stage you had to have someone walking in front of the car with a flag. You know, and it's almost, what's the point of being in a car if someone's got to walk in front? It's as quick to walk. So the AA was formed by a group of enthusiasts in how to change that. And there was also the kind of proviso that if you had an AA badge on your car and you went past a patrol, and if the patrol didn't salute you, that was a warning there might be a speed trap up front.
No.
So again, that was the way. And you know, in the 1950s and 60s, we had people saying, why don't AA patrols, you know, salute us anymore? And obviously, by then we had millions of members, and if AA patrols were saluting every millions of members, they wouldn't be able to do their job. So yeah, times have changed. But no, those historic traditions, I think, are very, very important. You know, we shouldn't be nostalgic. We look forward, but we also learn from our heritage and what our forebears did. And even back then, there was talk about the AA being always ahead and courtesy and care. So all of those values of courtesy and care and being ahead, being dynamic, are as important, ironically, today as they were 100 odd years ago. And what you find with AA patrols, part of their mantra when they go to a breakdown is fix the member and then fix the car. So it's checking that the driver and the passengers are okay. You know, it's little things. I know many patrols do this. If there's a dog in the car, many patrols have got a saucer in the thing that they fill with water for the dog. You know, and it's those little things that are more important to come first, those human interaction, and then they'll look at the car. And thankfully, in 86% of cases, they can fix the car and get the car going again, which is what people want if they break down. But yeah, I mean, our patrols, I've got to say, you know, I quite often go out with a patrol for the day, or if I see patrols out there, if it's safe to do so, stop and talk to them. And you know, they are our real ambassadors out there. And whenever we have AA awards, the most moving part is when we read out some of the citations that have been given to our patrols from the police service, the ambulance service, the fire service. Because more often than not, you know, whether it's a crash, whether it's a fire, because we've got 3,500 patrols out there, they are often the first people on the scene. And in fact, a couple of the citations in the awards this year, you know, when you think about mental health and stuff, were actually our patrols had stopped a couple of suicides from people jumping off bridges. And sometimes one case, a patrol had gone past this bridge, I think it was on the M1, and had noticed in the mirrors someone up above. And they'd actually parked back, ran back across fields, got back up there, and basically saved that person's life. So, you know, I have so much respect for our patrol force out there. You know, they're great at fixing cars, but also they're not bad at all at fixing people when they need to.
Oh, Ed, that is an absolutely amazing story. Thank you ever so much for sharing that. And I just want to say I knew it was going to be an absolute joy talking to you. It has been, I have to say, an absolute so insightful and interesting, and you know, just thank you ever so much. Everybody should know where the AA is, so I'm not going to give them details of where to contact you. You're on LinkedIn though, aren't you? You post quite regularly, so if people want to see what Ed's posting, check him out on LinkedIn if you don't already know him. But yeah, actually, it's just been so interesting, insightful. I just want to say thank you, and I'm sure everybody watching and listening is going to really, really enjoy it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you as ever. Thanks.
Oh, you're an absolute star. And I'm sure we'll bump into each other at one of the many, many events that are on to do with EVs this year.
Indeed, we will.
Thank you, Ed. And to everybody else, I'm going to say thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching this episode of Electric Evolution. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay connected with us. And if you're inspired by our journey towards a sustainable future and want to support our mission on a monthly basis, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Electric Evolution Podcast. Your support really helps us to bring the latest insights and discussions in the world of clean energy, electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging and sustainability to you. If a regular subscription isn't what you're looking for, you can always consider buying us a coffee. Just head over to www.buymeacoffee.com/Electric Evolution Podcast. Every cup helps us to keep the electric evolution moving forwards. And if you're curious about our work in the EV infrastructure sector at Full Circle Continuous Improvement, why not visit us at www.fullcircleci.co.uk to find out more. And if you want to send me a message, you can always email me on liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. And finally, please don't forget to share this podcast if it sparked your interest. And let's keep spreading the word about all of these topics that we're covering. So, until next time, see you soon. Bye!